let's give it a try.
And if you've got any silly stories, we like those too.
What's that?
Silly stories. If you've got any silly stories.
No silly stories. All serious. No, I don't have any silly
Really?
stories.
Out of business.
Not like walking down the road.
You're going to ask me about my youth. It was a boring youth. All I did was go to school and play around the center of town. Anyway. But,
Well, that's still good. I mean, you can say what you did when you played around.
no, I can't say all those things. It was basically Johnny. Jeez.
Okay, we'll leave that out.
Okay, you want to get started?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. I am, full name is Albert M. Clark III, but I'm known as Skip. I've been in town now for something like 83 years. But I'd like to go back to the early years when my grandfather was, before he became a mailman, and I think a lot of people knew he was a mailman back in the first part of the century. He was born in 1874, and he became a mailman, as I said, in about 1902. He was a mailman for something like 38 years, retired in, after 36 years of service, and that put him at about in the 1920s, I guess, if I figured right. But anyway, he retired and he got a federal pension, and his comments later on when I chatted with him was that he just loved to get money from the federal government. It's one of his highlights of working for the feds. During that time, he also became caretaker of the Orange Cemetery, and that was back before all the big construction we've had there. But there was work to be done. He did all the trimming, and he had some young people helping him. He also took care of the records. I remember working for him back when I was a teenager. That put me in about the 1960s, 70s, somewhere in there. And at that time, we all had these little hand clippers, and that's how we trimmed around all the stones. Thankfully, we don't have that kind of, now we have an upgraded system or string trimmers. I was just talking to a guy the other day that I was asking him how many stones he'd been trimming around, and he said he just can't count. There's so many of them. And I said, well, we used to do it with a hand clippers and a power trimmer. As I say, my father was grandfather was an important part of it, and he did that until he passed away in '72. He did it for like 50 years. And upon his passing in '72, my father took it over, and sadly to say, he only lived two more weeks, and he passed away. So there I am, the next in line, and so I started working and being part and caretaker, sexton, superintendent of the cemetery in '72. And I think I just passed my 50th year doing it with better equipment than my grandfather and my father had for the period of time he was there. I want to continue on the situation with my grandfather because I have a picture here, which you can probably see later. On Tyler City Road, which is right where the town hall is right now. That used to be the Joe Clark farm, and he had something like 60, 70 cows there. He had pigs, he had chickens. And so that's one corner of the town green. The other part, which would be where Brian is right now, his grandfather was Benjamin, and he had a good-sized farm there. On the other corner where Hannah Russell had a house, there was another farm there, and I believe one of the gentlemen, I believe it was your uncle, farmed there for a few years. His name was Paul Wright. And then the big farm, as I said, was where the town hall was. And that was a very modern farm. It had a silo on it where we kids would used to go up in there and mess around. And we also worked for them, throwing the silage down when all the cows needed the feed. So that was kind of neat. All this shows you that when I grew up, when I came into being, there was like 3 farms all around the town green. And the history of it is my family was there since early 1600s. And I think we go back to maybe 14, 15 years after your family came, because I think your family came in about 1620 or so. So some of the dates we have is about 1640. So this is basically where the Clarks were. They started here in the center of town, and we have been there since then. My grandfather lived in a building. He lived in this as a kid, but then he bought the place next to the Academy building between that and Eula's house. And that's where I had many good days with grandfather, telling stories about his life early on, and how he got around with a wagon and 2, I believe they were mules. It was a combination of a horse and a donkey. And they had to be tough animals because back in those days, the storms were serious. He told me about the winter of 1888, which I believe a lot of people remember, which was the hairiest snowstorm that people could imagine. He said the drifts were 8 to 9 feet tall. And I think I have pictures of vehicles and driveways, and it was just covered the vehicles. Thinking that snow in winter was the toughest thing for the animals and my grandfather, it really wasn't. It was the mud season, which came in the spring, because all the roads in Orange at that time were all dirt, and they just got clogged up. He said some of the times the mud was up to the axles with his carriage. So he said spring mud was the worst, and not knowing that he had a good time in the wintertime, it was still cold. He said, I think when he chat with him, that he only missed 2 days in a bad storm in 1911, which was another hairy period of time. So with all that, his keeping people happy, getting their mail on time, he really liked his job, I think, and was happy to do it for all people in town. And he did know everybody in town at that point in time. I don't know exactly how many there were. I haven't figured that one out, but still getting around town with dirt roads was a work in progress.
Skip, where was the post office? There was an actual post office building?
I believe they were working out of Scobies down at the bottom of the hill, because I did see where Scobie was during that period of time. And then when grandfather was getting near retirement, the post office down there is where People's Bank is now, and it's still there. They used a part of that. So that's, it's a central part of Orange and how we got things done. And I think because of the farm that was on the corner there, they had cows and they had horses, and I think that's probably where he kept his team of horses there. Because I remember going in there with my cousin John and some of the other kids there. They had a tack room where I had all the harnesses for all the horses and animals in there. Speaking of this farm, I was talking to Judy earlier, and at the farm they had pigs and they had chickens, and we had Orange Center School was right next door, and it was during one of my elementary school days that the teacher brought us over to the farm, and lo and behold, they had just slaughtered some pigs, and they had to hang them up on the front of the barn. And I was saying to myself, to Judy, can you imagine this day and age to have that happen with kids coming to see slaughtered pigs? They had a smokehouse down there, so that was part of their food situation within the family. I also want to mention that my grandfather was educated in town, but there's so many different schools, I guess, around the town. He did get his education that way, and he said, normally one teacher would take care of a child 5 years old to 16. So that one teacher did all that. how would you like to be doing that with being a teacher? But that's the way they had to do it because of the number of people. The other thing he mentioned early on, and this was cute too, the church is standing there since 1805, and so people would come from their distant homes around the town with their horse and buggy. And at that one point in time, they had a row of sheds right along the church, which would be next to my property, where my mom and dad had a house, the first house on Meeting House Lane. And they parked their buggies in there, and the horse and buggy would stay there to the service. But then the people would go inside, and you had to be sitting in a seat. And I guess you had preferred seating, because he said some of the time the new people would come in and sit in somebody's seat, and they were told to move. They were asked to move, because even back in then they had a caste system, so to speak, that people had to be in their place. So that, I think I had upon all this chats with grandfather for so many years, because I kind of knew him from the time I was about 15. I was maybe able to pick up stories till I was 30 years old, when he passed away at 98 years old. So that he lived a good life, and pleased with that. Going back and talking about the people around town, we have the Benjamins, we have the Joseph. Joseph was the one that had the farm on the corner there where the whole homestead was. And then we have Benjamin, who owned and ran Maple View Farm, where Brian has the horses now. He had a fairly good sized farm, and his cows would go down Meeting House Lane by our house and day in the morning, and then come back at nighttime. And I remember cows coming up the street, coming up Tyler City Road many days, and we had a cornfield behind our house, and they had made a little detour, go down our side yard and get into the cornfield. So there we were trying to help get the cows out, but they really liked getting a little bite of corn behind the house there. And then later on, Benny got into potatoes, and we used to, he had potatoes down on Meeting House Lane in those fields there. And I remember as a kid going down there and picking potatoes off the ground. I think we got something like a nickel or 10 cents a bag. And then the guy with the tractor would come through, pick them up, they'd go over into where they were size-wise they were judged, and then sent off to market. So those are the kind of things I remember as a kid growing up and being part of this farm scene there. The big farm there, as I said, on the corner, was one of the nicer ones. Ben Clark had a wooden silo, and that was all put together with a big steel cables to keep it in place. Whereas the one here at the corner was all cinder block, and it was really nice. The one where Hannah Clark had her husband had a farm there, that was a wooden silo also. So the different type of construction back in those days that the farmers had. What we're going to get into next, it was speaking of around the town green, just beyond Brian's house is a house where the Sherwoods had, and that's where Benny, Brian's grandfather, his sister had a summer house. They used to live in West Haven, and they came out to a summer house there, sort of a low, flat building, where the family enjoyed their summers there. And then 2 houses down was where my son lives, my son Jonathan, and that was a Harold Brown house. He was in World War II. He was a Purple Heart from World War II, and he was married to Elizabeth Clark, which was Benny Clark's sister. So there we had almost the whole town covered with, center of town covered with Clarks. I got married in '68, and my good wife came to Orange. She lived in New Haven, and we raised 3 boys from our house at 580 Orange Center Road. We've lived there, as I said, 68, rebuilding it year after year after year after year. And so at this point in time, we've got it almost looking good. And my wife is upgrading it by putting some new rugs in the living room, so that we're going to stay for a few more years. My son John lives across the street, J. Clark's Landscaping. He's our main source of maintenance for the cemetery. He's been doing that since 2004. And I'm pretty proud of the cemetery. We've grown immensely since I took it over in '72. We probably added 6 or 8 or 10 acres. We do have more growth. We have property behind the cemetery, and we also bought property on Meeting House Lane, which gives us quite a few years out. I would say over 100 years we've got for more burials. The property on Meeting House Lane, I think, provides open space to the town, so it's not only for our future, but it's something that people can look at and see open fields, which are taken care of from the Vesputa family, as you know, Judy. And then the other side, going back to Clark property, Walt Hine and his farm do a lot of raising corn and hay back in the other corner. So here we have a center of town, which, yes, it's a center of town, but it's also open space. I will continue along some lines about my personal involvement with the town, which was, as I say, Cemetery Association. But in 1978, 79, Ralph Capsulacho stopped by and wanted me to try out for the Board of Selectmen, which I did. I did get nominated. In '97 I started. And it was nice working for Ralph for so many years. Things were quite real as far as politics went, in the fact that we had an election. You'd fight back and forth with all kinds of issues. But then after the election was over, the first selectman be in charge, and we could get things done. Everybody worked together. And that was a time of Tony Giordano and so many other people that ran against Ralph. And over the years, I spent 20 years doing it. We did have some other people fill in. Ralph went to the state for a couple of years. Brendan Toohey was there for a couple of years. Dottie Berger was. So there was many people that took it over that really, class operation. I left in 1999. Pete Reed and myself were the only 2 Republicans on there. The Democrats had taken over a couple of years before. And so it was time to get out, and I left in '99. I don't regret my time there. I enjoyed it. I felt I know it was an addition because I had a history in the town, and it was very, very good at that point in time. I think Judy has her work cut out now, being on the board, but she smiles, and I guess she can handle it with all the issues that do come before them. So I'm pleased with that. And now I have a grandkid where I have to spend some time with him. He's in Boston, so we get him he comes to town once in a while. I spend a week or so with him. And my other son, Miles, who lives in Wisconsin, he comes east Thanksgiving or Christmas, so I get to see him. So I have a good nucleus family and loved by all. And hopefully we all have enjoyed a great being in Orange, working with Orange. And I know my wife has been part of Orange for a long time. Actually, she started with the community service at High Plains back many, many years ago. And she just retired after spending 35 years teaching at Southern and being a social worker at Yale University for many, many years. So now she's in full retirement, and I'm in partial retirement. I'm still working 6 hours a day, 5, 6 hours a day, doing landscape work, which I love. And I probably will have my boots on before I hit the ground. So I think that kind of brings it all together. And if you
I
said...
do have a question for you.
Shoot.
A lot of them we talked about the Bicentennial and how much fun we all had 50 years ago celebrating that. And I remember that you definitely got into the part of growing beards, must-side, whatever. And do you have any fond remembers of that week?
I sure do. Before I got to the sesquicentennial, I had once in a while I would grow a beard, and it was a nice black beard. And I said, well, I better grow one for the sesqui, which I did. And with that, my uncle, who was in charge of the skits and things for the sesquicentennial, his name was William Brown. He got me involved in being on the skit. And in that skit was that Bill Sperry was bringing me onto the scene in a covered carriage, open carriage, and I was Abraham Lincoln. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because I was certainly enjoying that part of it. I had my top hat on most of the time and my long tails. So it was great to see that, and being able to now be 50 years down the road, and here we are with the Bicentennial, which is, and I'm happy you're doing so much work for it, Judy, that it's good for the people in town to see it brought together of all the issues that were had back then. Fred Lutz did a beautiful job back then, but now we got Pat doing it, and I think it's going to be tremendous for the town. And it's nice. We had a very short period of time. We had a tremendous parade. I remember. I think it was a 3-hour parade back then. You probably won't have a 3-hour parade, but you've been able to bring everything together and having it over a period of time, which I think is good, rather than having it for just I think we had it back a week back then, but having it for the, what, 2 months or so you're having it now, so it's...
yeah, we found it was like just everybody's schedules and stuff. It seemed more apropos to kind of spread it out so that people can partake. Where 50 years ago, we talked about how easy it was for families to just block a whole week and do it.
Super.
Yeah.
And I think that I was just thinking about back then, you were asking us what was a great historical thing for the town of Orange. I think that back 50 years ago it was one of the greatest things I was part of. I was at age where you could do. I was 30-something years old. My wife and I both got involved. She was a little bigger here because Miles was not born yet. Miles was born in late '72, but she got an outfit, and I wore my outfit. I rented an outfit, and I think I wore it quite a few times. So it was beautiful. So thanks for mentioning that.
It was fun.
So,
can we take it to just like the present day? Like, because I know I'm driving around Orange. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a Clark's landscaping utility vehicle or something, and I see you guys. You seem busy all the time doing stuff around the area.
talk about Clark's landscaping.
Clark's landscaping.
Jonathan, the landscaping, how busy it is.
As I mentioned, my boys, all my boys, but my youngest boy bought me out in 2004. And at that time, I had a couple of mowers and I had a Kubota tractor. Well, things have changed. John has added to it immensely. He's got everything he can do, from digging holes in the ground to taking trees down 75, 80 feet up in a safe manner, because he has a lift for doing that. He has been able to create a business with all the problems around us with money and people, but we have a tremendous customer base, which I started many years ago. John's been able to keep a lot of them, and I think with the base that I had, he has, that it will be a business, very good business for many, many years. So thanks for mentioning that. It's certainly been a love for me to have a landscaping business where I take care of customers and go into a yard, it doesn't look so great, and turn it into something very nice looking. John's doing the same thing. And he takes care of the cemetery, and if anybody's been in the cemetery recently, I think you can understand that we've got a nice product out there in that regard. He also does all the burials for us, and we're happy to have that, keeping the funeral parlors happy. So on a lighter note, yes, we want everybody to be happy.
Yeah.
So I think we're all set here.